Hi, my name is Eva Shore, or Ava Shore, as I pronounce it, and I'm 79 years old. I live in the Villages in Florida. I've had a good life. I'm very lucky. I have three children, two girls and a boy, and they have children, a total of six. Um, I was born in Belgrade, Yugoslavia, and in 1940, August 1940. And my father was Hungarian and my mother was Croatian. My parents lived in a small town in Yugoslavia called Sisak, and for those days they were pretty wealthy. They had a department store, and there were important people in town. But my father had a job in Belgrade, and so my parents were living in Belgrade when I was born in 1940. Shortly after I was born, uh, Hitler came into power and decided that everybody needs to go back to their country of origin. And that meant going back to Hungary, my father's country of origin. So everybody got into their cars and we were all heading toward the sea. But my aunt, my mother's sister, Nada, she made it to the sea and they went to South America. They went to Argentina. My father and my mother and I didn't make it to the sea, and we were caught by the Iron Curtain in Budapest, Hungary. And Nazis were in Budapest, the Iron Curtain closed, and we were stuck there for the duration of the war. Um, it, Even as a small child, unfortunately, I remember more than I want to remember. You know, we did a lot of hiding. We lived in basements. There were dead people on the street, and people came along and took their clothes, so they were naked and covered with paper. Some of them didn't have paper, but I think when you're a young child, it doesn't have the same effect on you as it does when you're an adult. But my father was conscripted into the military, and so it was just my mother and I. And we did a lot of hiding. You know, I remember being caught in the basement one night when the building came down above us, and we got out, small, minor injuries. I remember appearing in front of the Gestapo magistrate, who I unfortunately told him that I was Jewish, and but he seemed to be forgiving that night, and he let us go. Um, we hid alone, we hid with many other people, and in 1945, the Russians liberated Budapest. Now, my parents didn't know they didn't know where, they didn't know anything about each other. But walking down the street one day in Budapest, my parents happened to meet again, strictly by accident. So that was a good thing, I guess. And we all got on a truck, not all, I mean, the three of us got on a truck, and we went to Romania. And we spent a year in Romania. I don't remember much about that time at all. Um, and after being there for what my mother told me was a year, we went back to Belgrade. Now, Belgrade had a tremendous shortage of housing because all the buildings were either destroyed or damaged. So uh, we lived in a building that was owned by my mother, or I should say by my mother's father before he died. Now, all my grandparents died during the war. My maternal grandparents were shot uh, relatively early in the war. My paternal grandparents, I'm not sure when my grandfather died on that side, but my grandmother on my father's side died almost, she lived almost to liberation. I mean, died apparently just a short time before um, the country was liberated. Um, so here we are in Belgrade. My father worked for Tito. Tito was the president of Yugoslavia, and my father, even before the war, his expertise was import and export. And so he worked for Tito in that capacity. I'm not sure what his title was, but he traveled so for the government. So I assume that he was pretty high up. My parents never wanted to talk about the war. Uh, so, and I probably missed a big opportunity not asking them more questions and doing voice recordings like some people have done, or even writing it down. I didn't realize that that would be such a great interest to so many people. Um, I should have talked to my mother more about her family, because I really don't know that much about them. I probably know more about my father's family. Anyway, and mother and I lived in this very large apartment in Belgrade with another family because there was such a shortage of housing that we had to share our apartment with another family. But we had a car, my father had a chauffeur, and we had a maid, and my parents went to dress up parties or dances because I remember my mother wearing evening gowns. So, I mean, I think, they were probably pretty happy with whatever they were doing. And I went to school, obviously. And one of the drawbacks of being in school in Europe in those days is I was left handed, but they would not let me write with my left hand. So I do everything with my left hand except write and cut with scissors because they didn't make any left handed scissors in those days. So I went to school, and my mother was a Hausfrau, a housewife, and my father worked for the government. And in 1946, the government of Israel decreed that they will accept refugees. And my mother said that she was going. My father said he wasn't going. He had a good, comfortable job, he had everything he needed. So my mother had what they call a lift made. A lift is a very large box where you put all your possessions into that box, your furniture, your rugs, your dishes, everything. And she told my father that if he didn't want to go, that's fine, but she was going to Israel. Now, my sister was born in 1946, and we had the availability of going on a ship that was designated for families with young children. And my sister was a baby, and we were allowed to go on that ship. And it wasn't exactly a luxury ship. I mean, even I knew at my age that it wasn't, we had triple bunks, and But we were going to Israel. Well, my mother packed everything up and she got on the train, and my sister and I got on the train, or she carried my sister, and my father was not with us. Well, several stations later, my father joined us. He apparently changed his mind and drove along the train tracks or whatever, and he joined us several stations later. And in 1947, we arrived in Israel. We we were in Cyprus for a couple of days. They wouldn't let the ship land in Haifa, and actually, we landed in Tel Aviv, not in Haifa. And but eventually, they did let us off the boat in Tel Aviv, and we went to a DP camp, deportation camp, which was just what it sounds like. A lot of people stuck together. My father was very lucky. He actually found a job with a company, Guzman and Company. God, it's funny how you remember certain things. Um, they imported bicycle parts from Europe, put them together, and sold bicycles in Israel. So my father worked for Guzman, and we found a place to live in Bat Yam, which is just south of Tel Aviv. Um, for me, it was heaven. You know, we were right next to the ocean. I mean, we could see the ocean from where we were. Uh, there was a lot of freedom. The weather was beautiful, uh, but basic necessities were lacking in Israel in those days, like food. The place that we lived was built as a hotel, as a motel, basically. And we actually lived in the part that was the restaurant. So there was just two large rooms, a kitchen, and well, there were two bathrooms. One of them we converted into a shower, but not the kind of shower you think. You put a tank, up, and you have a heater underneath the tank, and you heat the water, and when it's hot, you take a shower, you know. And we had an ice box. The iceman came every day. Uh, my mother cooked on a kerosene little one 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 kerosene cooker, and my mother was a seamstress. I'm not sure she really wasn't, but she decided she was gonna be a seamstress to make some money. So my mother grew up in a wealthy house. I mean, she was probably pretty spoiled, but she was a good sport. Uh, and My father worked in Tel Aviv, so he commuted to Tel Aviv every day. Bat Yam was a very small town at the time. It only had a parochial school, a Jewish parochial school, and one telephone for the whole town. And we had one car that was like a Model T. I mean, the whole town had only one car that was like a Model T. And everybody either walked or rode their bikes. And I went to the parochial school. In the morning, we learned religious subjects, Tanakh and Mishnah and Torah. And in the afternoon, we had the secular subjects. So that was and I was a good student, but I was very mischievous, very mischievous. And my mother was called to school on a pretty regular basis. My sister grew up to be a good girl. I wasn't a good girl, yeah. So, anyway, she came to school quite often on her bicycle. Um, so, this was in 1948. Israel became a country, and uh, I was very happy in Israel. Now, my parents applied for immigration to the United States when I was born, 1940. And my mother came up on the quota, the American government has a quota for each nationality. And my mother came up on the quota several years ago, but my father didn't come up on the quota until 1954. But in the meantime, while we were in Israel, my father's best friend from childhood uh, contacted my father. He came to Israel, contacted my father, and asked my father if he would like to work for him in Milan, Italy. And he also brought us a refrigerator, which was great. You know, all the neighbors thought it was great too. Uh, so in 1952, my father went to Milan to work for a company called Kemeny Overseas, and they were jobbers. They dealt in what they called clean scrap. Uh, these are when they cut things. Well, I don't know if you care about, but it's clean scrap. I mean, it's not scrap. I mean, it's clean. Countries buy it, remelt it, re-roll it, and make cans and whatever. So my father was selling clean scrap. My mother went to work for a dress shop as a seamstress. And my sister and I, oh, this was I'm going back to Italy, I'm sorry. So Italy was like heaven. I mean, uh, I mean, there was so much food in Italy. After you live in Israel, living in Italy is like heaven. In Milan, they had baked goods and they had pastries and they had toys. I mean, I really never had any toys. Um, I mean, it was just wonderful. We had a cook who came in every day and she made us lunch and dinner. And oh, it was a wonderful time. Wonderful. My father's employer at the time, I think, must have pushed the American government somewhat. And uh, my father came up on the quota system to immigrate. And so in 1954, we came to the United States. I decided to go to Israel is she thought that another Hitler will come along. And she didn't trust Tito as far as she could throw it. And my father working for him was actually, she felt dangerous, being Jewish. And as a matter of fact, after my father came to the United States, he was still traveling quite a bit because he was selling scrap, clean scrap. And he was in Yugoslavia one time, and they wanted to keep him. They wanted to arrest him. Now, he got out of there. I'm not sure how, but he never went back to Yugoslavia. Never went back to Serbia. After that, he was afraid that he spent a lot of time in Asia traveling and selling uh, scrap, but he didn't go back to Europe too often. He went to Germany a few times, but he traveled a lot after we came here, a lot. And in those days, you didn't get any miles either. uh, yeah, that was a later happening. Well, obviously in Israel, they were all Jewish. When I started grammar school, actually, I met a girl who was from Israel, Rena, and Rena and I spoke Hebrew a lot, and it was wonderful for me to have her here. But then she decided that she went back to Israel. She went back to Israel, she got married, and she became very Orthodox, and I haven't, for many, many years, I haven't heard from her. Uh, the high school that I went to, the neighborhood that I lived in Chicago, there were a lot of Jewish people there. So the high school that I went to had a lot of Jews in it. I lived along the lake on the north side. I didn't live on the lake, I lived just off the lake on the north side of Chicago. And that's where all the Jews lived. They lived on the lake, not like me, you know. And so there were a lot of Jewish kids in my high school. My area was not the area that I lived in was not very commercial. We had some stores, but it wasn't very commercial. We had a Woolworths. You remember Woolworths? And we had a bakery and a cleaner and a couple of small restaurants. Nothing, a grocery store, but nothing. You know, it was a nice neighborhood. I don't think that I was aware that I was Jewish. My parents, my grandparents were not observant, although in the town that they lived in, they actually had a temple. My sister and I went back to where my grandparents lived. I'm trying to think, we went back to Sisak. We took a tour and we went to Sisak. We took the train from Zagreb to Sisak. And I have to ask my sister, let's see, 2020. And I moved to Florida in 2003. I'd say maybe 10 years ago. God, I can't believe it's that many years ago now. Maybe, yeah, I'd have to look at my pictures and ask her. Yeah, I think about 8 or 10 years ago we went to Israel. I went to Israel with my daughter in 2004. Um, I have family in Israel. I have a first cousin. And no, we went back we did not go to Serbia, we went to Croatia. And we went back to where my grandparents had their house, which is still there. And we talked, they have a little Holocaust museum. We went there. We talked to the person who owned the house that my parents lived in, my grandparents lived in. It was a very interesting trip, very interesting. Yeah, my grandparent. There was a temple in Sisak, which is now a music school, and my grandparents were active in the temple. But I think I might be wrong. I'm probably wrong. In those days, unless you were Orthodox, you were not that observant. I think you went to temple, my mother doesn't remember having Pesach in her house, you know. So I think, they could, I mean, obviously they were Jewish and they, but I don't think they were terribly observant. And so I didn't, I don't remember knowing that I was Jewish until I got to Israel, you know. And it certainly wasn't talked about in between my parents, and they didn't inform me I was Jewish or what the difference was, or if there is a difference. So I certainly as a child, I mean, I don't remember even thinking about it. or knowing about it to think about it. You know, that's you have to know about it before you can decide. You know, we were hiding, but I mean, as far as I was concerned, well, I guess my we were hiding because we were Jewish, and I did wear a gold star, as did my mother, but it didn't have much meaning to me as a child. Yeah, the Jewish star. Yeah, the gold Jewish star. Yeah, my mother and I both had it, but I think children view things in a different light. You know, with they don't have the historical perspective. They don't. You know, I mean, I often think about whether I was affected by the war. Well, obviously I was, but I think kids are more, I don't know what the word is, they can, they don't think about being afraid. I think they adjust more easily to circumstance. I mean, it's hard to adjust when you're an adult. I think when you're a child, you don't even think about it. It is what it is. I mean, there isn't a choice. You know, go outside and play with the bombs or stay inside and be safe. You know, you're not given that choice. I live in the villages now, as I said, and there are several clubs where people are writing their own biographies. And I have a not a good friend, but a good acquaintance who belongs to one of these clubs. She keeps saying how I have to write my biography. And I really don't know how to approach it. Well, I did that. There is a radio program? Where they take people's stories. What is it? It's called StoryCorps. My daughter Stephanie made an appointment with StoryCorps in Chicago, and she and I did go and tell my story. Um, also, but I didn't. There is that thing that you do for the Holocaust survivors. Well, I had my father's first cousin's wife. I call her an aunt. She's in her 90s now. Now, both she and her husband were in concentration camps. And she has done the thing for Steven Spielberg. There's a very nice Holocaust museum. I think it's in Des Plaines, Illinois. Um, and my aunt contributed her bra from the concentration camp to the Holocaust Museum. Hannah is, I think, about 95 now. Yeah. And last time I was in Chicago, which was not last summer, the summer before. I always see her when I go. But this last year, I did not go to Chicago to see that part of my family which lives there and her. I, you know, Talking about the war years from a child's perspective is a lot very different than talking about it as an adult from an adult's perspective. It's important, but you know, I I don't think children saw the horror of it.
That's good.
Yeah, children just accept the
No
circumstance,
choice.
and you don't have a choice. You can't go someplace else,
Mm-hmm.
and so because I was so young, I think of course, yes, that there are some things that I probably look at differently than people, children who were not in the Holocaust. But, I think I'm very trusting, for
Yes.
instance. People think it's nutty, I leave my purse in the shopping cart. I just think that period of history, well, unfortunately, I think we're repeating it. That period of history, it was madness,
Yeah. Horrible.
you know. And people, I think, intrinsically are good. I believe in the goodness of people,
Yes.
and and so I try to live by that philosophy. The man thinks he's God, just like Hitler did. He thinks he's above the law. I mean, what he's doing to our environment, what he's doing to our schools because of DeVos, whatever her name is. I mean, it's, drilling in Alaska. I mean, it's just, it's shameful. It is shameful. It's taken us a year to put certain, laws down to protect, animals, environment, refugees, and he's destroying all of that with a 4-year term in office. I mean, it's going to take us so many years. God forbid he should. Oh, if he's reelected, I'm going to Israel. I mean, it's going to take us so many years just to get back to where we started from before he became elected. And yet, people, I mean, most of the people who are, not most, I'm sure a lot of the people who are blindly following him are educated. How can they not see what is going on? It is beyond me. It is. So, unfortunately, for the last 3 years, I wake up every morning angry. It is. I wake up every morning angry. And my youngest daughter says, don't watch CNN. I've had a good life in the United States. I went to school. I had some good jobs. I had some bad jobs. I owned a children's clothing store, which was very tough. Retail is very tough. Married a Jewish boy. I had 3 wonderful children, and I have 6 wonderful grandchildren. And I think I'm blessed. I'm really blessed.